New Year's can be a real trigger time for perfectionists, and physicians are no exception to that. I can't think of how many times in my life I personally or witnessed others, coming into the new year with a lot of magical thinking, right? I'm going to close all my notes. I'm not going to get upset when such and such thing happens. It's a very real energy. And it is fed by this notion that things will magically be different when the year turns over. We need to make a different decision. And today we're really going to talk about what is a different way that we can come into the new year without getting sucked into this new year, new you energy, which ultimately, feeds into a sense of lack and failure and discouragement. So let's talk first about why New Year's energy tends to do this to us. When we are making New Year's resolutions, we are often really paying attention to things that don't feel like they're going well, right? That could be closing your notes. It could be that your inbox is a disaster. Maybe you're not exercising or doing something else that you want to be doing to take care of your health, right? We focus on that lack and then try and use the new year to magically move into some kind of a new pattern. The problem with this is several things. One, it ignores our lived experience. There's a reason why we are struggling to do the thing that we would like to be doing. Again, whether that's closing notes or exercising regularly, something is getting in your way. And usually that something is not going away when January 1st rolls around. Two, focusing on what's not going well really tends to highlight where we feel behind. If you're struggling with perfectionism or people pleasing, focusing on your deficits is going to be really hard for you because you're going to constantly be paying attention to what isn't right about you, constantly trying to fix yourself. And that really feeds into this notion that you are broken and you're not good enough. That is not helping us. It really just leaves us in a place of feeling gross. Finally, when obstacles do come up, and we've had this magical thinking of, I'm just going to be better when January 1st rolls around, it leads us into discouragement and then often into feelings of failure. We know that this is a common pattern that many people run into. We joke about how, in January people are at the gym, and then by February the gym is empty again. But again, this focus on where we're not meeting it and magical thinking is not serving us. So let's start a new chapter, shall we? Now, I'm going to introduce a framework for us to think about doing things differently. It is absolutely normal at this time of year when we're transitioning from one year into a new year for us to do some reflection. When something ends and something new is beginning, it's a totally normal human experience to sit with it and think, where have I been? Where am I going? There's nothing wrong with that part of the energy. Where we get tripped up, though, is again the sort of magical thinking that, the year is going to turn over and going to be different, or I'm going to have a birthday and I'm going to magically feel different. If you remember being, a kid and thinking, well, when I turn 12, I'm going to feel a different way. Every year for a long time, I remember feeling that way. And guess what? It didn't happen. You can probably look at other times in your life going from resident to attending or fellow to attending or med student third year to fourth year, right? You didn't magically feel different, right? You were in evolution. One day did not feel different from the next. Things gradually changed over time, and that's how things go. So we don't need to not reflect or think ahead towards the future. What we need is a better framework than just thinking we're going to click a button and all of a sudden the problems are gone. So here's a framework that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And of course, as I've been thinking about it, I've seen it in a number of different places. And let's talk about it. And that is thinking of your life like chapters in a book. a novel specifically, let's look at the structure and figure out, all right, how can this help us to make sense of where we've been and where we're going? Now, if you're a child of the 80s and 90s, and assuming that you were kind of nerdy like myself, which is how we, stayed on the path to get into medical school, a lot of us, you may have played sim games when you were a kid. And I remember very distinctly what I loved about them is that if some disaster struck, you could just not save and you could start over from where things were. And I used to do that all the time, right? You might be playing SimCity and an earthquake occurred and disasters and there's fires and everything is chaotic. If you just quit at that point and you didn't save your progress, you get to go back to that time before the earthquake happened, right? You get to magically wipe away that experience and start fresh. And you might know that the computer algorithm is likely to feed you some kind of a disaster, right? So you can prepare for it differently. But there is this clean slate phenomenon. When we look at this framework of thinking about our life as a novel with chapters in it, we can remove that artificial thinking that we can just wipe things clean. When the year ends and a new year begins, we don't start with a clean slate, right? We have lived through the experiences that we've had in the prior year, and that helps to inform where we're going in the future. We need to look at our lives this way. And again, this idea of our lives as a novel is really nice because chapters flow from one to another. There is a sequence of events that happens. There is context and challenges and obstacles that happen sometimes within a chapter, sometimes within the overarch of the book, right? And we expect that. There will sometimes be villains or challenging characters that arise. There will certainly be obstacles. We can think about this in sequence. And let's think about some different chapters that have already happened in your life, or maybe something that you're experiencing now, so that we can start to really anchor this idea. So here's a few chapters that we might think about of experiences that we've been through and places we might be right now. Residency or fellowship was a distinct chapter. Yes, there were probably little chapters within that. We're gonna drop that for the sake of the analogy, but residency training or fellowship training had a start and a stop. It had, a discrete arc that you went from somebody who didn't know very much about your specialty to someone who is much more expert in it. Other chapters might have come up, such as early clinical responsibilities plus parenting young children, right? That's a common chapter that creates a lot of struggle. Another chapter might be you're in the middle of seeming like you have it all, seeming like you can do everything, and yet inside you're drowning. You're really struggling. You feel like completely overwhelmed, right? Again, a common chapter. Another chapter might be a new diagnosis for you or a loved one. And, that is the obstacle. We might be looking at a new job or trying to leave a job or a new relationship. These are all chapters. And if we follow the narrative, right, something is different by the end of the chapter. We start and we stop, but we don't wipe the slate clean, right? The character is the same throughout, even though they go through an evolution, but they are informed by the experiences that came before. So if we think about life in chapters like that, we can look and see, what chapter am I in right now? What chapters have I been through? And where do I anticipate going? You might not know the chapters that are coming next, but we can still see that there is a through line and they're informed by the chapters that come before. Another way that this is really helpful as a framework is because there is a main character that is the hero of our story. And my friends, that is you. That is you. I want you to sit with that idea for just a minute and think, oh, I am the main character. I am the hero of my story. Now, this is an idea that might be challenging to you, especially if you struggled with people pleasing, as a lot of my physician clients have. When we are used to putting other people first, that might include our family, our loved ones, our interestingly, how I separated those two things, but just follow me here. The people that we work with, our patients, our staff. When we are used to putting other people first, we may not realize that we are the hero of our own story. If we could sit and read through the chapters that we are currently experiencing as though we were reading a character in a book, what would we see? We would see the hero's thoughts and feelings. We would see their habits. We would see the things that are difficult for them. We would see the things that are easy for them, but we would see them from a little bit of a place of disconnect, right? Where we could really observe and often with a lot less judgment than we bring to ourselves, right? We want to follow the story. We want to see what happens to her. We want to see how she overcomes challenges. Can you imagine looking at yourself as the hero of your own story, thinking through your life in chapters, looking at your current experience as being perhaps at the beginning of a chapter, somewhere in the middle, or at the end of a chapter? If we can step back and really look at things from this perspective, we can have so much more grace, so much more curiosity about where we've been and where we want to go. It can be a really powerful tool. I came across this quote from Jeff Moore that I want to read to you. You wouldn't quit a show or a book just because the character hit a low point. You'd lean in to see how they rise. Treat your own story the same way. Be curious about the next chapter. You're all of it. The story, audience, director, and the star. Just imagine for a few minutes what that would be like if you were living as the hero of your own story. That means bringing main character energy. That means accepting that there are flaws and there are wonderful, amazing things that make your character compelling. If you were reading the story of you for the past year and thinking about it in this way, what would you notice about yourself? What would you notice about the woman or person that you are? The struggles you have been through, the challenges you have overcome, the ways that you have taken care of yourself or other people, and what would you want to see change? We can look at it in this way, in such a way that we don't give up on her. We don't believe that she's incapable of change. We do see that she is an imperfect human like every other human, but we come to her with so much more compassion and grace. It's a really powerful tool. And that leads me into an invitation for you. Now, we've talked about different chapters that have come up in our lives. And we've talked about this idea of New Year's and that whole energy around New Year's, New You. There's an exercise that can bring these two things together that I participated in recently in a coaching training group that I'm a part of, where we looked at 2025 through the lens of ourself as the hero, telling the story of 2025 with the idea that then we move into 2026, really grasping the arc of the character, the arc of the story of 2025, again with ourselves as hero. This took about 10 or 15 minutes for each of us to sit down and sort of write out the story, and it was quite powerful. I'm going to share that with you. And especially at the end, we all came together and we all read out loud the story of ourselves as hero. And pretty much all of us were crying, thinking about the arc of the story in that way, right? Because again, we often don't center ourselves as the hero in our own journey. I invite you to sit down and do this exercise on your own, not only to write out the story of 2025 with you as the hero, but also to do the exercise of reading it out loud. You might do this in front of another person. You might do this with a group. You might choose to start working with me as your coach, and we can do this exercise together. I'm telling you the power of doing something so simple. And again, we can do that in the context of moving from one year to another, but there might be some other chapter that you really want to look at. I can think of clients that I've worked with when we've moved from one job into another job, when we are transitioning in some capacity from one stage to another. Again, that might be residency into attending. It might be some other phase of life that we are in, that we're moving into another. Or maybe we're right in the middle of that chapter and we're really struggling. Doing this work can be incredibly powerful because it reframes for our brain how we look at our own story. So I invite you to do this as a New Year's practice if you like, but also to really start to frame your own experience in this lens, right? So if we think about our life as a book, as a novel specifically, with different chapters, we know that chapters open and close. We know that the character evolves at the beginning of a chapter and at the end of the chapter. Sometimes there is that literary turn where there's kind of, this sense that nothing is going to be the same for that character, that experience, and how that changes us, right? There are times in our lives when, of course, that happens. It also invites us to put ourselves as the hero in our own story. And this, my friends, is so powerful because if you were bringing that main character energy, how would you live your life differently? This is a great way for us to look at the new year. It's a great way for us to center ourselves in our own experience. It's a great way for us to be able to clearly identify what are the obstacles, what is the character thinking and feeling that are getting in her way or contributing to her experience in a way that we want to shift, right? How can we use this tool to bring more self-kindness and self-compassion into the work that we do when we are trying to improve our experience? Now, everyone can do this on their own, of course. And so many of us struggle to do this work when we are adding it on top of everything else that we're called upon to do. My friends, it is okay to ask for help. It is okay to ask for support. And I want to invite you to reach out to me. So many of us are wearing the mantle that we have to do it all, that we have to do it all on our own, that we are the helpers and not the ones who receive help. And that narrative is just not serving us. So if you've been thinking about coaching with me, if you've been thinking about reaching out for some support and you haven't really known, what would that look like? What kind of help would I get? This is a great time for you to sign up to have a one-on-one call with me. We can talk through what you're struggling with. We can see, all right, what chapter are we in? Are we bringing that main character energy? Do we want to bring more of that? Do we want to bring more self-compassion and self-kindness in? And how can we do that together? This is such important work. It really changes our experience. When I looked at my own story with this lens, I could see how I was judging myself for this past year, judging the experiences that I faced that I did not want to face. But when I could see myself as the hero in my own story, I realized, oh yeah, the hero of the story often faces challenges that they did not ask for. They did not want those things to be happening. And I'll tell you, it just really broke my brain in the best way possible to be able to reframe my year in that way. My friends, I thank you so much for listening. I invite you to reach out to me and set up a one-on-one call. You can schedule through my website, which is www.healthierforgood.com. The link will be in the show notes, or you can send me a message directly. My email is megan@healthierforgood.com. Again, that link will also be in the show notes. My friends, until next week, take care.